Hello and welcome. My name is Daniel Spear, and today I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the production of Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead is a film by George A. Romero. It was released in 1968, and it's largely credited as one of the most influential zombie movies. Now, the reason I wanted to look into this film is actually because of where it was filmed, which is around the Pittsburgh area in Pennsylvania. More specifically, a lot of the shots in the first movie are from a little town called Evans City, Pennsylvania. And it just so happens that Evans City is where I went to elementary school for first grade through sixth grade. So growing up, I definitely heard a lot about this movie. Evans City used to be the home to the Night of the Living Dead Museum. It was recently moved to the Monroeville Mall, which is where the sequel takes place. But I definitely remember growing up being told about the production of this movie in the Evans City graveyard, and I wanted to look a little bit more into that. So now we'll move a little bit into talking about the movie and the production of the film, starting with talking about George Romero. So Night of the Living Dead was actually George Romero's feature film debut, but before that he had been working in various different commercial capacities. Romero also studied graphic design and later drama at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, although he did not graduate. Romero and some associates formed the Pittsburgh-based company Latent Image, which would be the production company that would produce Night of the Living Dead. So for his first feature-length film, Romero based the plot of Night of the Living Dead on a short story called I Am Legend, which was written by Richard Matheson. It's a little bit different. It's about battling living dead vampires in a post-apocalyptic Los Angeles. So although he had the idea for this movie, he of course still needed money to fund the project. The project ended up on a $114,000 budget, which is approximately $1.6 million today. And that's a lot of money for sure, but $1.6 million is still on the lower end of filmmaking budgets and well within the indie filmmaking range. In an interview with Variety, Romero said that he had $6,000 when starting this project and raised the rest of the money through selling stock to investors based on demo footage. And because the budget of this film was so limited, that is actually why the film was filmed in black and white, because color footage was too expensive to buy color film. Romero has said that the decision to shoot the film in black and white was entirely budgetary. That low budget as well informed where the film was going to be shot. Pretty much the entirety of the film is shot on this 10-acre plot of land with an abandoned farmhouse in Evans City, Pennsylvania, with other shots being in the local graveyard, on the road nearby, and the basement shots at the Latent Image building in Pittsburgh. And the filming of this movie was a little bit unusual. They began filming before they had completely finished the script, and also it was filmed over a 7-month period in kind of on and off segments, because many of the cast and crew had other commercial obligations to work around. And again, because of these budgetary restrictions, the casting of this film was also quite interesting. For a lot of the extras, the zombies, and the policemen in the film, they were a lot of locals who lived near the shoot in Evans City. Romero said of this process, "We called them up and said, 'We're shooting a film.' And they said, 'Oh yeah.' And we said, 'Yeah, this is what we're going to need. We're going to need police cars, wagons, men, dogs, and weapons.' The policemen in uniform were real, and a lot not in uniform were off-duty cops that came and brought weapons and things. No problems at all. We weren't shooting in the city, so we didn't have to get involved with permits, but we found it very easy to get cooperation." But for the main actors, of course, they did do actual casting. Romero said of this casting process, "We cast around for people. That is kind of a random experience too. There wasn't much to draw on in Pittsburgh." He said of casting Judith O'Dea for Barbara, "The blonde girl, Barbara, is a Pittsburgh girl who was on the West Coast and happened to come back into town about then, so we used her." The most consequential casting choice, though, would be the choice of Dwayne Jones as Ben, the main protagonist of the film, as he was an African-American actor. This was unusual for the time to have an African-American main protagonist, but Romero has said that this was not an intentional choice necessarily. He said, "We had no preconceived notion as to the role being a black role. Dwayne just came in, he looked right, he read well, so we used him. We never took any further note of it. It's not mentioned in the script at all, although I know we're getting a lot of press comment over that fact." The film ended up premiering with an opening at one theater in Pittsburgh on the 1st of October 1968. This was at the Fulton Theater, which is now named the Byam Theater. It was then also released in 10 additional Pittsburgh area theaters on October 2nd, 1968, with other theaters across the country to follow. By December of the following year, it had made an estimated $2.5 million in box office receipts, or the equivalent of $22 million today. There was initially a negative critical reception of the film, with critics slamming its excessive violence and questioning the morality of Romero. A lot of this came from the fact that the film was not submitted to be rated by the MPAA, as it was a newly formed entity, and so the film was unrated. So tickets at that time were accessible to people of all ages. The most famous example of this negative feedback is the review that Roger Ebert wrote of his experience going to see the film in theaters, and he said, "The kids in the audience were stunned. There was almost complete silence. The movie had stopped being delightfully scary about halfway through and had become unexpectedly terrifying. There was a little girl across the aisle from me, maybe 9 years old, who was sitting very still in her seat and crying." So upon release, this film received some backlash for being excessively violent, but over the years it's gained a really big cult following. It's become kind of a staple in horror history, and in 1999 it was inducted into the Library of Congress's National Registry of Culturally, Historically, or Aesthetically Significant Films. And really, it set up the trajectory for modern-day zombie movies. Before this, zombies were more associated with voodoo and witchcraft, and there wasn't a whole lot of zombie film before this. But it sparked a wave of many, many follow-up works, which would influence later franchises and films like The Walking Dead, 28 Days Later, and World War Z. Romero would also go on to make many sequels of this film, including Dawn of the Dead in 1979, Day of the Dead in 1985, Land of the Dead in 2005, Diary of the Dead in 2008, and Survival of the Dead in 2009. So now that you know a little bit about the film's production and release, I wanted to talk about my experience going to some of the related sites when I was back home this Thanksgiving break. So the first and most important place that I went was the Evans City Graveyard. This was kind of my initial connection to the film, as it is the place I knew of when I would think of Night of the Living Dead. And I had been in this graveyard before. I actually performed in elementary school at a Veterans Day band event at this graveyard. But it was really cool because I was able to see the Evans City Chapel, which is featured in the film, as well as two of the graves that are more prominently featured. Nearby to this graveyard, there's also the farmhouse and the bridge right outside of the farmhouse. Now, the farmhouse was torn down. When they were filming in it, it was already an abandoned farmhouse, and they were able to film in it because it was going to be torn down. So now there is another house on that property, and it is private property, so I did not visit that. But I did go to the bridge outside that is also featured in some of the police scenes. Now, all of those are in Evans City, within about a mile of my elementary school. But little did I know the film actually has some shots that were taken even closer to where I live. The opening of the film has a few long shots of a car driving down a windy road. Now, this windy road is called Franklin Road, and the place in which they film at least two of these is less than half a mile from my house. So of course I went there and I tried to recreate some of these shots. Now, the overgrowth of the area and the buildings in the area make it kind of hard to capture the exact same scenery. You kind of can't see the road in some parts that you would be able to, but I tried to match it the best I could. In In addition to these shooting locations, I also visited the Living Dead Museum in the Monroeville Mall. In this museum, they have a bunch of artifacts and props and advertisements for all of the films of the Living Dead series, as well as other Romero projects or Romero-related artifacts. I'll put some of the coolest photos in here so that you can enjoy them as well. I think there are a few major things I took from this experience, one of them being a sense of inspiration for low budget and regional filmmaking. Romero didn't have the backing of a large production company or a significant amount of money in the production of this film. Romero was able to rely on his resourcefulness in the plot and setting of the story, allowing for the limitation to a single shooting location and minimal protagonists, and still create a well-crafted enough story to capture the minds of people for decades to come. This heavy regional focus, I think, also has created a strong sense of attachment to the film for many people, not only just from Evans City, but from the Pittsburgh area. I thought it was really cool to see the people at the Living Dead Museum who were such big fans of the franchise. I know they also host a Living Dead weekend every year where a bunch of people come out and people who are extras in the film will go and speak, and they have a whole event for it. And I think a lot of that has to do with feeling connected to Romero and his work because of the shared identity as someone from Pittsburgh and because he based so much of his work in Pittsburgh. I also think the film was very ahead of its time and progressive in both the casting of an African-American man as a protagonist and in the kind of conceptualization of zombies as a metaphor for a controlled mass. They go into it a little bit more in the sequel, which is more, it takes place in the mall, so it's more heavily leaning on an idea of consumerism, but you can still see traces of that in the original Night of the Living Dead, the idea of a mass hysteria or mind control situation, forming zombies who are not able to freely think. Alright, I think that's all we can get into in this video. I could keep ranting about this movie for hours probably. I had a really fun time visiting these sites and being able to recreate the shots from the movie. I just think it's so interesting how big of an impact this film left with such little resources to begin, and how it has such a close-knit and dedicated fan base in the region. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed exploring the production of Night of the Living Dead.